It's dangerous to go alone. Take this. Welcome back. I'm Santiago, and this is part 2 in preparation for your guide to playing RPGs solo. So we're jumping into step 4 of our preparation, and this one's pretty straightforward, creating your character. So you're going to use the rules in the system that you've decided to go with from our previous step. Just go by the rules of your game, create your character. Pretty simple. Where we're going to add those a couple things. First off, don't forget, or don't neglect, I should say, motivations, negative traits, and purpose for adventuring. Your system may already have this in there, but I'm putting this in as an emphasis to not ignore that. You may or may not have played RPGs before, and maybe not use these very much, but I strongly recommend that if you haven't before, or if it's your first time playing, to make sure that you add those things in there. Motivations are just things that push your character to want to act in certain situations. They may be loyal, or they may never back down from a fight, things like that. Negative traits again are going to be things that maybe they're greedy, or they're always curious, things like that. Just think of certain things, roll on some tables, find some negative traits. Purpose for adventuring is more of an overarching motivation. So it's kind of similar, but something that's going to drive your character in a more general sense. Why they went out in the first place. They may have been outcast. I know that's pretty stereotypical, but something along those lines, something that got them out there. Maybe they just wanted to strike out on their own, or they wanted to prove somebody wrong, or prove themselves worthy of some sort of cause or something like that. The other thing we're going to want to add is allies and enemies. So think of different roles that allies could play. It could be literally someone traveling with your character. Maybe you don't want to go as a lone character, but it could also just be somebody who's a like a quest giver. The guy at the local tavern. But what this is going to do, and it get somewhere between 2, 3, 4, something like, maybe roll a d4 plus 1. But just some people that you could start off with to interact with, or to go to if you feel lost or not sure where to go. And then also in the same vein, enemies. So think of someone akin to a Gollum, or the Sheriff of Nottingham from the Robin Hood, something like that, like a nemesis. It could be more of an entity, maybe. So maybe there's a group that is, adversarial to you. It could even be a good group that is looking for you for some reason. Maybe you have some information that you could blackmail the local guards, and so they're an enemy of yours. But this is again going to be at least some baked in backstory and characters you could interact with that might come out in the adventure. And so be sure to flesh them out with a little bit of history and their relationship to you. You don't have to, write a whole, story or novel with this, but just put them in there. Okay, on to step 5. This is tools. So these are going to be things that you're going to want to keep around you to reference in order to just assist you with playing. So one of the first ones I have here are random generators. So these are going to help you when you run into NPCs. You want to generate locations, ideas for quests, rumors, events, items, loot, things like that. So I have a few here that I'm going to link below and show you. All right, so Table Fables, some of my favorites, and they are filled with all kinds of goodness, character traits, locations, quests, a lot of things I just named. Those are some go-tos. You have Book of Random Tables and other tools I will for sure do reviews in the future, but anything like that. And again, you could use some lists you find online. More important than the random generator is going to be an oracle. These are systems that are going to help you run your game on the GM side. So of course you're going to be the player, but at points where the GM would normally help answer questions, you might have answers to it. You don't always need to use an oracle. You might have a great idea when you come into something that you want to implement and add to your game, But in the times where you can't think of something and you want to get inspired or want to know the answer and you want to be surprised, that's where this could come into play. So a couple of tools that I've used here. We have the Game Master's Apprentice deck. This is, as well as it is an oracle, has all kinds of random stuff on here, from things you might find in people's pockets to names, vices and virtues, just part of this game system. And of course, an oracle with likely odds, yes or no questions and answers, and just different symbols to kind of a la Rory Story Cubes, to just kind of get your mind inspired. And one that you may have heard through the rounds, if you've watched several videos similar to this one, is Mythic Game Master Emulators. This is the second edition, the hardback book. But what it's essentially going to do is, when you have a question, let's say you're in a dungeon and you're roaming through and you're about to open a door into a room and you want to know whether or not there's going to be someone on the other side, you could just answer it and just go with what you feel. Or if you really want to be surprised, there may be some likelihood there. So let's say if I'm roaming a ruin dungeon, I knew that I came into a ruin and there's been rare occurrences that I've run into monsters or people who inhabit the dungeon or the prison, let's say, that could be a lower likelihood. Or if I know that I infiltrated or snuck into this prison and there's a very good likelihood that there's somebody behind that door. So to kind of play into fate itself, you're going to use an oracle system to help you answer it. So as an example, I have these cards here. Let's say it's there are better than 50% odds. It's likely, and I reveal a card, and yes, so the card just gave me an answer, and this one says no. So that system is based off of just different numbers and percentages, and the likelihood that would suggest what will happen when I open. The biggest thing that oracles are going to help you with are moments that need to be inspired. So if you are trying to run your game and there's something more open-ended, maybe as you're walking through a corridor in this dungeon, a random event happens. You have your system for random events, and you want to get an idea of what exactly happens. I mean, an infinite number of things could happen. You could have somebody ambush you. You could have uh, a trap spring or something like that. But you could use one of these tables, and I'll give you an example here. Let's see. I roll a 50, which is hinder, and a 62, hinder obscurity. Okay, hinder obscurity. So the first thing that comes to my mind is something is obviously keeping me from being hidden. So what that means to me is that all of a sudden around a corner, I see the bright light of a torch come right around the corner, and I have nowhere to hide. I'm kind of caught in this alleyway, this corridor of the dungeon. Now I've got a situation, I have to do something about it. So instantaneously, that puts you within the context of what was going on. I had to have some context there. I was going down a corridor in the dungeon, and something like that is a easy, pretty cool. Now I want to find out what happens. All right, so the last tool is a journaling or story tracker. This is optional, but again, I'm going to strongly recommend it. Some of you players watching this are going to be more of a journaling or a story driven type of a player. So this is going to be really important. And you could use anything you'd like. You could use, just a journal book. You could use an app online. There's different websites that kind of helps you keep track. If you want to keep a laptop next to you and type up your adventure as you're going, whatever you'd like to use. But here are some of my suggestions of things you're going to want to keep track of. Of course, NPCs are pretty obvious. Names, their characteristics, their importance, where to find them, story beats and threads that they might have attached to them, because they may come up throughout your game. Your different quests, of course, world details are you going to want to add. story threads, and those could be quests, but it could be, I would say those maybe are more rumors or things that you want to investigate that aren't necessarily quests per se. And then scene notes and summaries of each of your plays. So as you play scene by scene, we'll get into this in gameplay, but you're going to want to write kind of quick synopsis of chunks of your gameplay as you move from scene to scene, almost like writing a script for a movie where you're going to want to just kind of briefly say what happened, and then a summary is more of an encapsulation of your game session as a whole. The last thing that I think you should have is a twist emulator, is what I'm calling it. A system like Mythic has their own system. They have the chaos system. The chaos factor is part of that game. Briefly, what that means is a number that represents, the goings on in the world. The higher that number is, the higher chance you have of rolling a random encounter or something interrupting what you're doing. So I've written down here a system that interrupts or interjects, but you may not want something like that. With a One Ring RPG, which I love, I've mentioned several times before in other videos. That one has the Eye of Mortar, where whenever something bad happens, something negative, or you roll essentially in that game is a critical fail, that is going to increase the Eye of Mordor. And at certain points, again, if that triggers, the higher that number is, it's going to give you a higher chance of that triggering, and something awful is going to happen to you or your character. You might have an outburst. So think of any of the Lord of the Rings movies when that happens, where King Thorin just has this bit of madness, or even Bilbo when he lashes out at Frodo. It finally catches up to them, and something happens where they can't control themselves. And two simple systems you could use while we're on the subject. You could use just a dice-driven mechanic, which is a lot simpler than the systems that I just explained there. You could, between every story thread, before you're about to launch into that next scene, you roll a d12, and if you roll a one, a random event happens, and go to your inspiration tables. You could use a card system and assign every time that assign every suit an event type, where if you draw a spade, then a negative event happens. Every time you draw a heart, then something happens with you or one of your allies or enemies. Roll a random event to see what that exactly means in your game. So something like that. But the reason why I bring that up is that because your game might get stale, or you might feel like you know what's going on at every turn, and this is really going to kind of put some plot twists and add some friction and tension and conflict into your game, which is you're definitely going to want. There's one last thing that I almost forgot, actually, but I think it's the most important. The key to your game is seeding your game with an ultimate goal. Don't neglect this. What do I mean by an ultimate goal? Have an overarching purpose of this whole adventure, and it's going to save you a lot of heartache. The number one reason why people quit on their games, I don't have any data to back this up, but I will tell you that for the solo player, not having an ultimate goal in mind will dishearten someone and bring their game to a grinding halt. I'll give you the golden example. Where am I going to go? I'm going to go to Middle Earth, of course. But what would the Lord of the Rings be without the goal to destroy the One Ring? There were so many things that happened in between that, wasn't there? There were so many storylines and side quests and things that happened along the way, where the backdrop of this whole thing, the purpose of everyone moving forward, was to save the world by destroying the One Ring. Frodo and his pal Sam were traveling. That's what they were trying to do. The rest of the party were trying to gather up forces to ultimately distract the armies of Mordor so that they could destroy that ring. That's what it all culminated to. I'll give you some quick examples. You could do something like unite the factions. There are several groups of warring tribes or kingdoms, and your goal is to bring them together somehow. That's in and of itself a start. Find a lost MacGuffin. There's some ancient relic out there somewhere. No one knows where it is, but you know you need to find it because it's going to save your people or something like that. The point is that you come up with something. Take down the big bad. Super just vanilla, but it's something that will push your game, drive your game. If you get more experienced in this, but I'm assuming most of you watching this are really trying to find a reason or a way to start. So that's why I'm telling you this. You should add that in there. The last thing you could do to find your ultimate goal for your game is uh, make a table or even ask a prompt on Chat GPT. I'm going to write down and put in the comments a prompt that I've used to come up with 20 different ones. You could roll on a d20 and go with that one, and every time you start a new campaign you can use a new one. So that's the end of preparation. You should feel ready. If you're not, that is okay, but if you've gone through those steps, then you're ready to go. The next few videos in this series are going to cover gameplay, and then I'll do a live play, because that is it. I want to show you, with all that you have here, you can play a solo RPG, any RPG, on your table and have a good time. So thank you again for watching. Subscribe to the channel. Add some tips if you've done this yourself. Leave some tips and strategies for other players to read down below. If you see any corrections or additions to anything I've said today, again, just comment down below. I'll see you on the next one.